Have you ever stopped long enough to ask yourself a question most people avoid? What if everything you were told about work, safety, and time was not designed to set you free, but to keep you predictable, manageable, and contained? What if the very rules you followed with discipline and pride were never meant to make you powerful, only useful? You were taught that hard work is the answer, that if you give enough effort, enough years, enough obedience, life will eventually reward you. But look around with clear eyes, not hopeful ones, and you begin to notice something unsettling. The ones who work the hardest are rarely the ones who control their lives. They are the ones most exhausted by them. This is where the first illusion begins, not as a lie that shocks you, but as a belief that quietly shapes every decision you make. From a young age, you were trained to associate effort with virtue, to believe that exhaustion is proof of progress, that being busy means you are moving forward. But busyness is not direction, and effort without structure is not power. There is a difference between spending your life working and spending your life building. And most people are never taught that distinction. They wake up early. They follow instructions. They meet expectations. And they repeat, day after day, year after year, believing that consistency alone will deliver them to a destination they have never clearly defined. What is missing is not effort. It is intention, not time spent, but control gained. Because if your work does not move you toward ownership, toward leverage, toward independence, then no matter how hard you push, you are only reinforcing the system that requires you to keep pushing. And yet, this system does not present itself as a trap. It presents itself as safety. You are told to choose stability, to avoid risk, to secure a steady income. And this sounds reasonable, even responsible. But examine it more closely, and a different picture emerges. Stability in this context does not mean freedom. It means dependence that feels comfortable. You exchange your time for a fixed return. You operate within boundaries you did not create, and you rely on structures you do not control. This is not safety. It is controlled uncertainty disguised as protection. Because the moment that system shifts, the moment it no longer needs you, everything you called stable begins to dissolve. Real safety does not come from predictability. It comes from capability, from the ability to create, adapt, and move without permission. And that is a skill rarely taught to those trained to follow. Then there is the most dangerous belief of all, the one that quietly justifies delay, the idea that you have time, not in a measured sense, but in an emotional one. The feeling that there is always another year, another chance, another moment to begin. Time does not announce its departure. It does not warn you when you are spending it on repetition instead of transformation. It passes in patterns, not in milestones, in routines that feel harmless because they are familiar. You do what you did yesterday. You think what you thought yesterday. And because nothing dramatic changes, you assume nothing is being lost, but something is always being traded. Every day you are either moving toward a defined purpose or drifting further from it. And drift is silent. It does not feel like failure. It feels like normal life, until enough time has passed that normal becomes irreversible. This is how the structure holds you, not through force, but through agreement, not through restriction, but through belief. You believe that working harder will fix a system that was never designed to reward effort alone. You believe that safety is found in staying where you are, even when that place limits what you can become. You believe that time is abundant, even as it is being spent in ways that do not return value. And because these beliefs are shared by millions, they feel true. They feel unquestionable. They feel like reality itself. But reality is not always what is repeated. It is what is examined. And the moment you begin to examine these ideas, you feel a shift, subtle at first, but undeniable. You begin to notice patterns you once ignored. People who broke away from this script, who refused to trade their lives for predictability, who built systems instead of just working within them, who understood that effort must be directed, that time must be guarded, that safety must be created from within. They did not reject work, they redefined it. They did not avoid discipline. They intensified it, but they applied it differently, not toward maintaining a position, but toward building something that could exist beyond their constant presence. That is the difference between labor and leverage, between surviving and designing, between being used and becoming the one who decides. And when you see that difference clearly, something uncomfortable happens. You can no longer fully believe in the old model, but you have not yet stepped into a new one. You stand in between, aware that the path you were given leads somewhere limited, but uncertain of what lies beyond it. This is where most people retreat, because awareness without action creates tension, and tension demands change. It is easier to return to what is familiar, to silence the questions, to continue the pattern, because the pattern at least feels known. But the moment you see through it, it is never as solid as it once was. The truth is simple, but not easy to accept. You were not taught how to become free. You were taught how to become reliable. You were not trained to question the structure. You were trained to function within it. And as long as you measure your life by how well you follow those rules, you will never discover what exists beyond them. This is not a call to abandon responsibility. It is a call to redefine it. To take responsibility not just for your tasks, but for your direction. Not just for your output, but for your outcome, because the moment you begin to see work not as an obligation, but as a tool, safety not as a place, but as a capability, and time not as something you have, but something you are constantly converting, your entire perspective shifts. You stop asking how to endure, and you start asking how to design. You stop waiting for permission, and you begin to look for leverage. You stop assuming there will always be more time, and you start treating each day as a decision that compounds. Nothing about your life so far was accidental. It was structured, repeated, reinforced until it felt natural. And the moment something feels natural, you stop questioning it. You were not pushed into a cage. You were guided into a pattern so consistent that it stopped feeling like a choice, step by step, instruction by instruction, approval by approval. A structure formed around you, not to break you, but to shape you into something predictable. And the most powerful part of that structure is not what it forces you to do, but what it convinces you not to question. From the very beginning, you were introduced to a system where the rules already existed before you arrived. You learned when to speak, when to stay silent, when to follow, when to wait. You were told what success looks like, what failure means, what is realistic and what is not. And because you were taught early, before your identity had formed, you did not resist it. You absorbed it. What you repeated long enough became natural, and what became natural stopped being examined. You were rewarded for being correct, not for being original. You were praised for following instructions, not for creating new ones. And slowly, without any dramatic moment, a shift occurred. You stopped asking what is possible and started asking what is allowed. That question alone defines the boundary of most people's lives. Over time, obedience stopped being something external. No one needed to monitor you anymore. Because you learned to monitor yourself, you filtered your thoughts before speaking, adjusted your actions before trying, dismissed ideas before exploring them. You became efficient, reliable, consistent, but in that process, you also became contained, not by force, but by habit. The system does not need to restrict you directly. It only needs to define the range within which you believe you can operate. Once that range is accepted, you will stay inside it voluntarily. You will call it logic. You will call it responsibility. You will call it maturity. But in reality, it is conditioning that has been repeated so many times it feels like truth. Look closely at what is rewarded in most environments. Predictability is valued more than potential. Stability is valued more than expansion. You are encouraged to become someone who can be relied upon to perform within a structure, not someone who questions whether the structure itself is limiting. And the more consistent you become, the more you are reinforced to stay that way. Social pressure strengthens this invisible boundary. You see others following the same path, chasing the same milestones, measuring success the same way. It creates a sense of normality, and normality is powerful. When something appears normal, it feels correct, even when it is limiting. You are not told directly to think small, but you are surrounded by examples that make thinking small feel reasonable. This is how control becomes internal. You hesitate not because you cannot act, but because something inside you signals that stepping outside the pattern is risky. You feel resistance not because the path is wrong, but because it is unfamiliar, and unfamiliar has been quietly associated with danger. The system does not eliminate your potential. It redirects it. It takes your energy and channels it into maintaining what already exists instead of creating something new. You become productive, but not necessarily powerful. You become efficient, but not necessarily free. And because you are moving, because you are achieving small wins, you rarely stop long enough to question the direction of your movement. But every so often, something breaks the pattern. A moment of awareness, a shift in perspective, a realization that the path you are following leads somewhere defined by others, not by you. It is not loud. It does not come with certainty, but it is clear enough to create discomfort. You begin to notice that doing everything right does not guarantee a life that feels right. Most people ignore that moment. They return to routine, to familiarity, to the comfort of not questioning, because questioning creates tension, and tension demands change. It is easier to continue the pattern than to step into the unknown. But once seen, it cannot be unseen. You may continue operating within the same system, but internally, something has shifted. You start observing instead of just participating. You start asking why instead of just how. You begin to separate what you truly think from what you were taught to think. And in that separation, something opens, not a clear path, not a complete answer, but a possibility. The possibility that your life does not have to follow the structure you were given, that the rules you accepted are not absolute, that the limits you feel are not fixed. This is the beginning, not of rebellion, but of awareness, not of chaos, but of choice. Because the moment you see the structure clearly, it loses its authority over you, and what once felt like your nature reveals itself as something you were trained to become. You can walk out of a system and still remain controlled by it. You can change your environment and still carry the same limits, the same reactions, the same patterns that shaped you before. That is where the deeper struggle begins, not outside where the rules are visible, but inside where the rules feel like your own voice. Because once the structure is internalized, it no longer needs reinforcement from the world. It sustains itself through your habits, your emotions, and the beliefs you repeat without questioning. Comfort is the first force that tightens this internal grip, and it does so quietly. It does not demand, it offers. It gives you relief after effort, ease after pressure, and slowly it begins to redefine your standards. What once required discipline now feels optional. What once felt necessary now feels negotiable. You tell yourself you will act later, that you will push harder when the moment is right, that there is no need to strain yourself now. And while each decision seems small, together they form a pattern that shifts you from building to maintaining, from growing to staying where you are. Comfort becomes dangerous not because it feels bad, but because it feels good enough. It removes urgency. It softens ambition. It convinces you that stability is progress, that consistency without expansion is enough. And over time, you begin to protect your current position instead of challenging it. You avoid discomfort not because it harms you, but because you have lost the habit of facing it. What once sharpened you now feels unnecessary. And without realizing it, you begin to trade long-term strength for short-term ease. Fear operates differently, but it reinforces the same outcome. It does not offer comfort. It offers caution. It presents scenarios, outcomes, possibilities that may never happen, but feel real enough to influence your decisions. You hesitate before acting. You analyze instead of moving. You wait instead of stepping forward. Fear tells you to be careful, to avoid loss, to protect what you already have. And while that may sound reasonable, it becomes limiting when it stops you from pursuing what you could become. The deeper layer of fear is not about failure itself. It is about identity. You are not just afraid of losing. You are afraid of what losing would mean about you. You are afraid of being seen as incapable, of confirming doubts you already carry, of stepping into a situation where your current identity might not hold. So instead of confronting that possibility, you stay within environments where your role is already defined, where expectations are manageable, where risk is controlled. This is how fear maintains stability, not by stopping you completely, but by narrowing your range. You still act, but within limits. You still move, but in directions that feel safe. You convince yourself that you are progressing, but you avoid the very situations that would force you to grow beyond your current level. Fear does not eliminate your potential. It contains it. Debt adds another layer, one that is both practical and psychological. It is not only the financial obligation, but the weight it places on your decisions. Every move must be calculated. Every risk must be justified. Every step forward must consider what could be lost. Debt anchors you to consistency. It forces you to prioritize stability over experimentation, income over innovation, security over possibility. Over time, this creates a mindset where bold action feels irresponsible. You begin to associate risk with danger rather than opportunity. You delay building something new because you cannot afford uncertainty. And while responsibility is necessary, it becomes limiting when it is driven entirely by fear of loss rather than vision of gain. Debt does not just restrict your resources, it reshapes your thinking. It conditions you to operate within boundaries that feel non-negotiable. But the most powerful chain is the one you cannot easily identify. The beliefs you carry that were never truly yours. These are the ideas you absorb from your environment, from the people around you. From repeated exposure to what is considered normal, you were told, directly or indirectly, what is possible for someone like you, what is realistic, what is out of reach. And because these ideas were introduced early and reinforced often, they became part of your internal framework. You begin to see the world through these beliefs. You filter opportunities based on them. You limit your actions according to them. You decide what to attempt and what to avoid without realizing that the criteria you are using was inherited, not chosen. You say things like, "That is not for me," or "People like me do not do that." And those statements feel like truth, even though they are simply patterns that have been repeated long enough to feel real. These borrowed beliefs are reinforced by evidence, but not in a neutral way. You notice examples that confirm them and overlook examples that challenge them. You build a version of reality that supports what you already believe. And in doing so, you strengthen the very limits that keep you in place. This is not a conscious process. It is automatic, and that is why it is so difficult to break. When comfort, fear, debt, and borrowed beliefs combine, they create a closed loop. Comfort reduces your drive to act. Fear reduces your willingness to risk. Debt reduces your ability to move freely. And belief defines what you think is possible. Together, they form a system that keeps you consistent, predictable, and contained. Not because you lack ability, but because your internal structure is aligned with staying the same. This is why change feels like resistance. Not because the new path is wrong, but because it conflicts with the system you have been reinforcing for years. Every time you try to move beyond your current identity, you feel tension. You hesitate. You question. You delay. And unless you understand where that resistance comes from, you will interpret it as a sign to stop instead of a signal that you are moving in the right direction. The shift begins when you stop treating these forces as facts and start recognizing them as influences. Comfort is not a command. It is a preference. Fear is not a prediction. It is a response. Debt is not permanent. It is a condition that can change. Beliefs are not absolute. They are constructs that can be replaced. When you see them this way, you create distance between yourself and the patterns that control you. That distance gives you a choice. You can continue to operate within the same loop, reinforcing the same identity, repeating the same results. Or you can begin to interrupt it, not all at once, not perfectly, but consistently. You choose discomfort over ease when it matters. You act despite fear when the direction is clear. You reduce what holds you back and build what moves you forward. You question what you once accepted and replace it with something stronger. And as you do that, something begins to change. Not suddenly, but steadily. The forces that once controlled you start to lose their hold. The patterns that once defined you begin to weaken. And the identity you are building starts to feel less like effort and more like truth. Because at a certain point, it is no longer about what is holding you back. It becomes about what you are no longer willing to carry. You already know what to do. That is what makes this so frustrating. You have seen the path. You have felt the urgency. You have made the decision more than once. And yet, somehow, you return to the same patterns, the same habits, the same version of yourself that you promised to leave behind. It does not happen all at once. It happens quietly, almost invisibly. A small delay here, a skipped action there, a moment of hesitation that feels insignificant until it becomes a pattern again. And then you find yourself back where you started, wondering how clarity turned into repetition. This is not a problem of knowledge. It is a conflict of identity. There are two versions of you operating at the same time. One built from vision, the other built from memory. The first sees what is possible. It imagines a different life. It sets higher standards. It pushes forward. The second is shaped by everything you have done repeatedly. Every habit you reinforced, every belief you accepted, every action you took, long enough for it to feel normal. And when these two versions collide, the one that feels familiar almost always wins. The conscious mind is where decisions are made, but the subconscious mind is where patterns are enforced. You can decide to change in a moment. You can commit to a new direction. You can feel the intensity of that decision. But beneath that moment exists a deeper structure that does not respond to intention alone. It responds to repetition. It follows what has been practiced, not what has been promised. This is why motivation fades so quickly. It lives in the conscious mind. It is emotional. It is temporary. It rises and falls depending on what you feel in the moment. But behavior is driven by the subconscious. And the subconscious is built over time. It does not adjust because you feel inspired. It adjusts because you repeat something long enough for it to become automatic. When you attempt to change, you are not just taking new actions. You are challenging an existing identity. And identity resists change. It is designed to maintain consistency, to keep your behavior aligned with what you have been. If you have lived as someone who avoids risk, then taking bold action feels unnatural. If you have operated at a certain level, then stepping beyond that level creates internal tension, not because you are incapable, but because you are stepping outside what your mind recognizes as you. This tension is often misunderstood. It feels like doubt, like uncertainty, like a signal that you are not ready, but in reality, it is a sign that you are moving beyond your current programming. The discomfort is not a warning to stop. It is a response to change. And the way you interpret that response determines whether you move forward or fall back. The mind is constantly reinforcing what it believes to be true. Every thought you repeat, every action you take, every emotion you attach to an experience strengthens a pattern. Over time, these patterns become automatic responses. You do not think about them. You simply follow them. This is efficient, but it is also limiting because once a pattern is established, it will continue until it is replaced. Autosuggestion plays a critical role in this process. The thoughts you allow to repeat become instructions. If you tell yourself that you are not consistent, that you always fall back, that change is difficult, those ideas are accepted by the subconscious as directives. Your behavior begins to align with them. You hesitate more. You delay more. You reinforce the very identity you are trying to change. But the same mechanism can be used in the opposite direction. When you repeat a new belief with intention, when you act in alignment with that belief, when you reinforce it through consistency, it begins to take hold. At first, it feels unnatural. It requires effort. It feels like you are forcing something that does not fit. But over time, repetition reduces resistance. What once felt difficult begins to feel expected. The key is not intensity. It is persistence. One strong decision does not override years of conditioning. One day of discipline does not create a new identity. It is the accumulation of repeated actions that shifts the balance. Each time you choose the new behavior, you weaken the old pattern. Each time you act in alignment with the person you want to become, you strengthen that identity. There will be moments when the old self feels stronger, moments when you are tired, when your focus drops, when the pull toward familiar habits increases. These moments are not failures. They are tests of stability. They reveal whether the new identity is strong enough to hold under pressure. And in those moments, your response matters more than your intention. If you return to the old pattern, you reinforce it. If you continue with the new one, even imperfectly, you strengthen it. The difference between staying the same and becoming something new is not found in one decision. It is found in how many times you repeat that decision when it is difficult. Over time, something begins to shift. The actions that once required effort start to feel normal. The habits that once felt unnatural become part of your routine. The identity you were trying to build begins to feel real. You no longer rely on motivation to act. You act because it aligns with who you are. The split begins to close. The conflict between intention and behavior becomes less intense. You stop negotiating with yourself as often. You move with more consistency, more clarity, more control, not because you eliminated resistance completely, but because you changed which side of yourself you reinforce. At a certain point, the old self no longer feels like home. It feels like something you recognize, but no longer belong to. The patterns are still there, but they no longer define your actions. They lose their authority because you have replaced them with something stronger. And that is when change becomes stable. Not when you decide once, but when you repeat the decision until it becomes who you are. At some point, the movement stops feeling like progress and starts feeling like drift. Not because you are doing nothing, but because everything you are doing lacks a center. You wake up, you act, you respond, you complete tasks, you move through responsibilities, and yet beneath all of it, there is a quiet question that does not go away. Where is this actually leading? That question does not come from weakness. It comes from awareness. The awareness that effort without direction does not accumulate. It dissolves. And once that awareness appears, it becomes difficult to ignore because it exposes something most people never confront, that a life filled with activity can still be empty of intention. Until that moment, it is easy to believe that progress is simply a matter of doing more, working harder, staying consistent. But consistency toward what? Effort applied where? Movement in which direction? Without a defined purpose. These questions have no clear answer. And when there is no answer, the mind defaults to what is available. What is urgent? What is expected? You respond to circumstances instead of shaping them. You follow opportunities instead of selecting them. You move because something is in front of you, not because it belongs to where you are going. A definite purpose changes that completely, not by adding more activity, but by organizing everything you already do. It becomes a reference point, a standard against which every decision is measured. It is not a vague idea of wanting success or improvement. It is specific. It is chosen, and it carries emotional weight. It answers not only what you want, but why it matters. And that reason becomes the force that holds your attention when distraction pulls at you. When difficulty tests you, when uncertainty tries to slow you down, when a person lives without a definite purpose, they are constantly adjusting. They adapt to what is around them. They react to what appears. They shift direction based on what feels right in the moment. This creates movement, but it does not create momentum. Momentum requires alignment, and alignment requires a clear direction. Without it, even disciplined effort becomes scattered, and scattered effort rarely produces meaningful results. The moment a purpose is defined, something begins to reorganize internally. Thoughts that were once random start to align around a central idea. Decisions that were once uncertain become clearer because they are measured against something fixed. You begin to ask different questions, not what is easiest or most available, but what moves me forward. That shift may seem small, but it changes everything, because it replaces reaction with intention. Purpose also changes your relationship with time. Time is no longer something to pass or manage. It becomes something to direct. Each day carries weight because it can either move you closer to what you have chosen or pull you further away. You begin to see that time is not neutral. It is constantly being converted into results, whether those results are intentional or accidental. And once you see that, you become more deliberate, not out of pressure, but out of clarity. There is also a deeper shift that occurs at the level of identity. When you choose a definite purpose, you are not just choosing an outcome. You are choosing a direction for who you are becoming. Your actions begin to reflect that choice. You start to see yourself differently, not as someone searching for a path, but as someone walking one. That distinction matters, because identity influences behavior more than intention ever will. This is where many people hesitate. To define a purpose is to commit, and commitment requires letting go of alternatives. It requires focus, and focus means you cannot pursue everything at once. The mind resists this because it prefers options. It prefers flexibility. It prefers the illusion that all paths remain open. But as long as all paths remain open, none are fully pursued. Clarity demands selection, and selection demands discipline. A purpose that is weak, undefined, or not reinforced will not hold. It will fade under pressure. It will disappear when distraction appears. It will be replaced by whatever is easiest in the moment. For a purpose to become definite, it must be repeated, visualized, and connected to emotion. It must be present in your thinking daily, not as a distant idea, but as a guiding force. The mind follows what it sees consistently. And when a purpose is held with enough intensity and repetition, it begins to influence the subconscious. Once it reaches that level, behavior starts to change in a different way. Actions become more automatic. Decisions become more aligned. Opportunities become more visible. It is not that the world changes. It is that your perception changes. You begin to notice what was always there but did not fit your previous focus. You act with more precision, not because you are forcing yourself, but because your direction is clear. This does not remove difficulty. In many ways, it increases it, because clarity eliminates excuses. When you know what matters, it becomes harder to justify what does not. You become more aware of wasted time, of misaligned effort, of actions that do not serve your direction. That awareness can feel uncomfortable, but it is necessary, because without it, nothing changes. Living without purpose feels easier in the short term, because it allows flexibility. It allows avoidance. It allows you to move without commitment. But over time, that lack of direction creates frustration, because effort does not translate into results. Living with purpose requires discipline, but it creates alignment, and alignment creates progress. The transition is not instant.